and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any persons wishing to address the board this evening? Can I have an approval of, well, first I'll say that obviously I'm not Todd Polke. He is away on vacation, I believe, somewhere warm, I'm sure.
Someplace warm, and he'll be all tanned when he gets back.
Yeah,
And
disgusting.
we don't want that to go public, though.
So anyway, I will be presiding over the meeting today. So can I have approval of minutes from January 4th, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I have approval of the agenda. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any conflicts of interest? Nope. Okay, move on to the approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, reports of the president.
Good afternoon, Vice President Parker, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity again to allow us to present with some of our academic programs from Southeast Tech. And today I have the pleasure of introducing members of our electronics and mechatronics team. On my left, we have Kurt Olson with the electronics technology team, Brian Cox with the mechatronics team, and then we also have Bo Anderson, and I'll let them make further introductions. Gentlemen?
Can one of you guys take a look at the sound system?
Sounds good.
Oh, it was.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. As Lon told you, my name is Kurt Olson. I teach electronics technology at Southeast. And our purpose here today is to kind of inform you of what we do, basically. Start off with the boring stuff, I guess, if you will. Our curriculum basically consists of 2 years, as all of our associate's degrees do. Mechatronics and electronics both have a common core. Gives the students a flexibility to be able to change mid-year, basically. We have some certain classes that they can decide, maybe electronics is more my thing, or mechatronics is more my thing. And so they can change that without any sort of penalty that first year. So the third semester it becomes a new year. Then after the fourth semester, then they become an associate's degree. We have our faculty and staff here anyway. We have 3 of us. My name, like it says, Kurt Olson. I have a bachelor's of electrical engineering from South Dakota State, and a master's of education from Southwest Minnesota State. And this doesn't seem possible. It's my 16th year at Southeast this year. 11 years at Daktronics, so it was very small spot as far as one location, which was nice, I guess, but it also gave me a very diverse resume, basically. So at Daktronics, you can see what I've listed up there, basically, is some things that I actually did as a technician. I did PC board repair to start with. I actually supervised the call center support technician support area as a student, and then it also is full-time. Lots of field service. Did installations, mostly within the country. I did make one international trip. Manufacturing, did some work in the plant floor, manufacturing and as far as product, circuit boards, that whole thing. I delved into project management a little bit, including managed a project for the United Nations. I installed a voting system to a similar place like this. Actually, I did a school board in Kenai, Alaska. So if you want a voting system, they can help you out with that as well. Let's see, what else did I do here? Product development, so I did some circuit board design, stuff like that, more of a all-encompassing type thing. Lots of testing. I dabbled with AutoCAD, doing system designs, more like system layouts. I didn't do the mechanical drawings of the systems, but more of the over things like that. And my final job there was I actually designed circuit boards, laid the traces and things out, and actually have a sample of something we do here at Southeast for your benefit to look at. But that, again, is my personal experience. go ahead and talk about his.
I'm Brian Cox. Also have a bachelor's degree from South Dakota State University. Mine is electronics engineering technology. And then I got my master's in education also at South Dakota State University. My 11th year at Southeast Technical Institute. Prior to that, I had about 10 years industry experience. For most of that, I worked as a field service technician for a company called Hicks Enterprise. They had amusement and vending machines in eastern South Dakota. I was on the road a lot, really a lot of electromechanical repairs, a lot of electronics controlling mechanical movements, which sort of led me into the mechatronics side of things. I was certified by the state for as a level 1, 2, and 3 video lottery technician. I also had 4 years at Daktronics, started there as a maintenance technician, working on the weekend shift, repairing, keeping the machines running that kept the electronic assembly process in motion. And from there, I became a manufacturing supervisor in that same department, and then had the opportunity to come to Southeast Tech and teach.
Continue, let me take over.
I can continue. Our final member of our team is Julie Sackett. She is our lab specialist. She was unable to come today. She has an associate's degree in nursing and an associate's degree in electronics technology, which she got from Southeast Tech. She graduated in 2001. This is her 9th year at Southeast Tech, and her industry experience as an electronics technician was also at Daktronics. It included circuit board repair, procedure documentation and revision. She did a lot of new employee training, which made it really a good move for her to move into our lab specialist position. And she did a lot of software installation on our control products. Julie was actually one of the people I supervised while I was at Daktronics. So we had a little bit of a connection before she came down here. Our students, typically our students are male. We do have a few female students, but in this type of field, we have a predominantly male student population. Ages and life experiences vary. We get students who are right out of high school. This is their first post-secondary education experience. We get students who are, in some cases, approaching retirement or maybe even after retirement and just looking to re-career in their later life. We get former military who have a little bit of military background in electronics or electromechanical, and they're looking to formalize that with a degree, so it will make them more employable. So really a broad variety of different backgrounds that we have, and it tends to work really well. We have some of the more experienced students. We'll take some of the younger students under their wing and help move them along, and then the younger students bring an energy level that sometimes really enhances the learning experience. Some aptitudes needed, algebra-based math skills. We really don't go beyond the algebra, a little bit of trigonometry, but we don't get into the calculus-based design things. Good mechanical aptitude, a physical science background, a desire to understand how things work and how to improve them, and a desire to be a lifelong learner as technology is constantly changing. If you're not learning new technology, you're really not going to progress forward anymore. I always like to say we want the people who took their toys apart when they were kids because they wanted to know how it worked.
All right. So specifics about our programs anyway. Electronics, like the common first year, we have our basic how electricity works, basically. We call it DC-AC concepts. And then we get into a little bit of digital circuits. And then that would be considered our core classes, I guess. The second year for electronics, we kind of dive into the next stage, obviously. We deal with a lot of interfacing as far as making a circuit work with something else, like a sensor or a motor or something like that, or some kind of display technology or whatever it might be. We do a little bit of printed circuit board design, and I guess I do have this here. I guess it's a little demo here for you. The front part is actually a purchased item, but it's an LCD. I mean, it's a clock, basically. So on the back side is some surface mount components, some through-hole components, that's the type of design we work. We'll do the schematic, and then we'll lay out how all the circuit's supposed to work, fit it on the actual board, and we were actually had a good opportunity with formerly LodgeNet. When they changed ownership, they got rid of a printed circuit board mill, so we actually can mill that with our CNC mill at our school, which is about a $15,000 item we didn't have to purchase, which is nice. So we didn't have that ability up to about 4 years ago, I suppose. But we do some of that. And then we also do some programming in our third semester, excuse me. We do microcontrollers called PIC microcontrollers, which are in a lot of equipment. We program with a language called PIC Basic Pro. And so everything is really embedded as far as inside of one controller nowadays. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you'd see lots and lots of different circuits, or integrated circuits, are little black things on there, basically, if you don't know what I'm talking about, on there, several of them. Now it's all embedded in one controller. So lots of programming is necessary. So we kind of dive in to get at least the start of it. We also do some programming application called LabVIEW. LabVIEW is an application that many technician places uses for automated testing. Raven Industries here, for example, uses it for their automated farming. As far as lots of switches and sensors and things they can automate, and one computer can do all this test equipment. And I'm happy to say that actually a graduating class of mine about 10 years ago, 7 years ago, I don't know, something like that, actually brought LabVIEW to Raven. They didn't have it before that. They had this bank of switches and knobs and dials and things, and now they have a computer. And so they can do it much, much quicker as far as that. And it's Southeast students have brought that to Raven. My final semester we have is a capstone project. We do lots of things as far as bringing all of our things together. They range, I let the students decide what they're doing, what they're going to do. They are dealing with project management, scheduling, budget, resource management, all the documentation, and then the final product that they might produce something like this. Just to give you an idea, I actually did I don't think I have it with me, but a time-lapse video of me creating that board, actually, because I wanted to kind of as a promotion kind of thing. And that board nonstop takes probably 8 to 10 hours, I suppose, to finish. But so if you know what you're doing. And then, so the student project might take several weeks to possibly months to also do something like that. Mechatronics?
Okay. For mechatronics technology, again, the students share that first year Common Core where they learn really just what is electricity, what is electronics, how do we control it, how do we regulate the flow of electricity. Then the second year they really get into applying that to control applications. We also add some topics that focus more on plant automation. So we add fluid power, hydraulics and pneumatics, electric motor controls, and typically, Kurt mentioned using sensors to control motors. On the mechatronics side, the motors would be much larger. They might be multiple horsepower instead of fractional horsepower. We do AC, DC, servo, and stepper motors, all just different methods to control and operate a motor. Then we also do, our programming is programmable logic controllers. It's a hardened computer used in industrial machinery to control it, rather than, imagine a laptop near an automated welding process. It would be very susceptible to the noise created by that. A PLC is a dedicated computer that operates that equipment without being damaged by the environment. The program that we use, the language you use is called ladder logic, and it looks very much like drawing a schematic that would control the machine without the computer. So it's more of a technician-based language. Our final semester, we don't really do the project-based, but we have a systems class where we integrate all of the concepts we've learned in a computer-integrated manufacturing cell. We have a small cell, 7 stations, that manufactures a small product. It actually makes a pneumatic directional control valve at 7 stations. The students do all of the, first we go through the safety and all the documentation. Then we go through setup and calibration with the machine already assembled and working to make sure that we can optimize its function. Then we tear it apart, and they go through all the mechanical adjustments on each individual station, write programs to get it to operate. We delete all the programs off, they write all the programming. We hook it all back together, and they have to set up the programming and communication so that each station communicates to the previous and following station to make sure that the product flows smoothly. And then when they get all that done, I go through and I plant bugs in the machine, and they have to troubleshoot and repair it and make sure that it still operates. Kurt mentioned the mill machine that he has to make that circuit board. His students would design that board, assemble it, test it. My students would work on the milling machine that helps create that product. They might work on pick-and-place robots that would place all the components on the machine, and soldering equipment that would automate the soldering process to put it together in a hands-off situation. Some of our data, our current total enrollment, electronics and mechatronics, is 45 students. That includes our first year and second year. It also includes a group right now, an evening cohort, with about 8 students who will graduate in December of 2017. Our last 5 years overall job placement in a related field has been 86%. And the average salary in 2015 for mechatronics was just over $21, and for electronics was about $16 for starting right out of school.
So, as my slide earlier said, basically, as far as careers in electronics technology, I like to think of it as a very well-rounded education where you can do lots of things. Again, most of those things actually I've done myself, like bench tech installation, tech support of some sort, manufacturing, research and design, technical sales, technical writing, project management. If you were in the industry as far as 20 years ago, probably, electronics technicians were the computer network technicians. That didn't exist as a program, so actually the companies, Daktronics, for example, and other companies I'm aware of, their computer networking people were actually electronics technicians. They take some of our courses as well. It's everywhere, and it's one of those things that I think is kind of hurting possibly our enrollment sometimes. Is it's really an invisible technology because it's everywhere. It's in your pocket. But who makes that? What makes that? It makes it invisible, so it just appears. And so it's one of those things. I think it's a challenge for us to get our name and what we do out there.
Careers for mechatronics technology students would be a maintenance technician, process technician, instrumentation. Maintenance would be repairing, maintaining, keeping machines running, doing preventive maintenance. Process technician would be helping to design and improve processes. Instrumentation tech is really monitoring the process, using feedback to make adjustments and changes. And then there's also machine installation and setup if they work for maybe a manufacturer of that equipment, for a company that does like metal fabrication machines. They would work with the sales crew when the equipment is purchased, move it on site, set it up, get it running, maybe train the local operators. I mentioned preventive maintenance a little bit already. And then field service technician, these maybe again would work for an equipment manufacturer where you would go to various locations and help the local maintenance crew fix larger problems on newer equipment. This is just a short list of some of the companies who have hired our students in the last 5 years or so. There are 22 on the list. It's by no means inclusive, but those are the ones, like I say, who we recently have worked with. These are companies. Smithfield Foods, you're probably familiar with. Malloy Electric, you might be familiar with. If you don't know Orion Foods, you have probably had Hot Stuff Pizza and had their products. So they should all be very familiar companies, and I'm sure you're, if not familiar directly with them, you have experienced some part of their products. Wells Blue Bunny, everybody loves ice cream.
The interesting thing about it is, unlike some programs, I'm just name, for example, I don't know much about the health industry, but like nursing, for example, you go to nursing, you become a nurse. And there's other things off from administration things, obviously, is there. But for the electronics, mechatronics, we try to keep as much core as possible because there's not really two jobs up there that are the same. So you're going to be doing a different task at each job, and so we try to keep our core information there so they can, again, grow into their position that they're going to be in.
Overall impact on the workforce, careers have really changed, in the electronics industry especially. You don't have TV repairmen anymore. There used to be a TV repair shop on every corner. That's really gone. The consumer electronics side is gone. It's really not a service industry. So what we really do is, you hear a lot about value added. Well, that value added, that means that a technician somewhere is doing something to add value to what you have. Value-added agriculture, through GPS and all the automated farming technology they have, they're farming truly by the inch, and they've quadrupled production rates from acreage that was marginal at best in the 60s and 70s. Value-added production through automation of food processing and packaging, or again, agricultural products and turning them into newer, better products, soybean processing with alternative fuels, biofuels, ethanol and soybean-based diesel, along with all the other consumer products that are derived from those agricultural products. And then, example, Daktronics, value-added advertising. It used to be you had one billboard that advertised one product. That company could charge one customer for putting their sign up. with the new electronic billboards. Every 3 minutes or so, it's a different product being advertised, so they're billing several different customers for that same available billboard space. So they've added value to the square footage of that sign through electronics technology. I'll let you go ahead.
As Lon also pointed out, Bo Anderson here, he's I'll just kind of go through this, and if you have any questions for him, he's happy to answer them, but he's a 2004 graduate. Was he a student of yours? No, you hired it.
I hired it, yeah. I actually had the opportunity to hire Bo when I was a supervisor in electronics.
So, yeah, so it's a very much a connection all the way around here, but yeah, he was my student, so I saw him both years of electronics, and so he's a 2004 graduate. He was at Daktronics for 12 years. Again, I'll have him speak basically what he did, and then he's recently changed jobs into interstate control systems over actually right on our campus almost right up. So, Bo, a few words?
Don't really care to get up here and talk about myself, but as you can see, I got hired at Daktronics by Brian as a bench tech. Within the first year with my, believe it or not, with my looks, I did have a career before that, so I might look really young, but I graduated high school in '92, and I did not go to Southeast for 12 years. I chose to work as a painter for 10 years, and kind of got tired of that, wanted to pursue something a little different and get into the electronic side. So started at DAC, bench tech, moved into, actually when Brian left, that opened up a position that my supervisor took, and I took his as the testing supervisor. So then I was in charge of hiring all the techs that came out of Southeast and other schools, as well as a pipeline that we did a rotation for the engineering departments and customer service. The opportunity came up with the Sioux Falls plant starting, so I jumped on that and became an integral part of the Sioux Falls Daktronics startup. That was a lot of fun and very taxing. After that, I decided to change gears and move into engineering. The opportunity was there. It was a lot of fun. I did that for about 9 or 10 years, and just recently moved to Interstate's control systems as a project estimator, which is another jump in a different direction, but it actually kind of leans more towards the mechatronics side now, where that wasn't my specialty. It was the electronics. So it's kind of it's just a neat story, I guess, without me talking about me. Sorry, but yeah, so that's kind of where it's at right now. Is there any questions for me that you might have? Experience or anything? No? I guess that's me.
If I could add in there, Bo's story is not really a unique one, where it's not where you are at a dead-end job. Basically, you're just going to be this job for the rest of your life, basically, where he has evolved and gone through several different careers. He had a title of engineer, but never actually had a degree of engineering, which is a very much a commonplace in our industry. But he has definitely done well with himself, and hopefully will continue so.
Bo won't brag about himself, but I'll say this. I interviewed him first, and there was another supervisor who was scheduled to interview him after me. I sprinted down to HR and said, let me make this man offer.
So that concludes it. Are there any questions for us that you may have?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you just have you mostly have men in your program.
Yes.
So do you have any strategies that you're looking at to try to recruit more women for your classes, or places that you're kind of getting your literature out or your message out to?
Official strategies, I'd have to say no.
Sure.
Brian and I have been, for the last several years, going to Whittier Middle School for a career class they have in the spring. And obviously, being a middle school class, they have pretty much a pretty good mix between male and female. And most of the interest at that point seemed to be mostly the females. They asked the most questions, and somehow there becomes a disconnect between that whole science interest and, because it's really what we are, really a science program, and to whatever they become 4 years later. So I don't know if it's cultural or if it's just the way it is, but again, if you have ideas, I'd be happy to hear them, but we struggle with it. Again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, as far as all of my female students I've had really have been a level at least as high, if not higher than the male students. They just are better students, I think. That's just,
No offense to Bo, of course.
Yeah.
yeah, I think, I don't have any numbers for you, but again, in the 15 years I've been here, I think we've had probably around 15 females is all. I mean, it's maybe averaging about one a year. Yeah.
Interesting. And do you guys have to do an internship at all, your students? Is there an internship required, or?
We don't require one. Some of our employers offer what they call an internship or a student part-time position. But currently, our advisory board doesn't really think it's necessary for the degree, so we don't add it as a credit thing. But they do have the opportunities to, like Smithfield Foods, for example. They've got a great, called Learners to Leaders, where they basically pay for a whole bunch of their school if they're employed there. Daktronics has a tuition reimbursement program. I think Raven still does, I think, too. Several companies, again, are encouraging. Orion Food just talked to our students here this morning, and as a part-time student position, they have an $18 an hour.
Wow.
But it's a not very great shift. It's like way late and way early in the morning, but it's a very good an opportunity for us, financially anyway. So I hope somebody goes after it, but no internships at this time.
Sure. And one last thing, do you have any idea where your students come from? Like, are you getting a lot of Sioux Falls students? Are you getting a lot of rural students, or South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa?
Kind of a dual thing on that one. Go ahead, yours.
A lot of the mechatronics students, for some reason, come from that northwest Iowa, southwest Minnesota, even the Canton, South Dakota area. It seems like I get kind of the slightly more rural student. I think it's that mechanical draw that, been around machinery and are interested in it, but maybe don't want to work outside 12 months out of the year. But they still like the machinery and the equipment.
Interesting.
For electronics, it's kind of a mix. It is. And I don't know if it's more so or not, but Brian mentioned earlier about the diversity as far as ages is concerned, where we probably have maybe half our students are, I'd call traditional 18, 19-year-olds. And then we've got several, like Bo, for example, had 10 years of painting experience before he came over here. And we've got a lot of military, goes to electronics because they have done electronics in the military, like Navy, a lot of Navy people on boats and stuff. And then one student, I think the oldest one I had was 55. And so he came back, and he came back because came to school because he hurt his shoulder, workman comp thing. So he couldn't do his job, and so he came back to do something that would actually, he wouldn't have to move around so much for. But I don't have any good numbers for you on that.
Sure. It's interesting. Thank you.
Anything else?
Any other questions? All right. Can I get thank you very much.
For your time.
Can I get a motion to acknowledge the electronics mechatronics program overview report?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Am I saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, next report.
Good afternoon, Vice President Parker, board members, and thank you for coming by, Kurt and Brian and Bo. Nice to meet you as well. It's one of the success stories that I want to mention. I've mentioned at a few different meetings, but one of their students is a young man that I met from the Hovland Learning Center, and he's from Ethiopia. So he was at the Hovland Learning Center to finish his GED. He was able to do that. Got a job at Smithfield Foods, but he continued on in the mechatronics program. He's going to be graduating this spring, and I think what's so encouraging about that story is that, Smithfield Foods worked with him to allow him time to attend the mechatronics courses, but based on his knowledge and experience he gained at Southeast, he was promoted off of his entry-level job to a maintenance position, and I think he said he was making like an hour now, and when he graduates in the spring, there's potential more opportunities. And what was also exciting, I think he indicated he brought 3 other individuals from Smithfield with him now to Southeast, and that was kind of the connections that we obviously hope to make, and was a very positive story, and the department should be really proud of the work and the effort that they put in to help our students be successful. So I have just a quick update on the healthcare sector breakfast. And what that is, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but the Southeast Tech has partnered with the Sioux Falls School District, with the Forward Sioux Falls and the Sioux Falls Chamber to offer what we hope will be several sectors or industry sectors, the first of which we provided last Friday morning, and it's going to be about 7:30, 8:30 or so, and we had thought we would get about 25 to 30 representatives from the healthcare fields in the region and across Sioux Falls, and I think we had over 60 individuals attend. We had a panel of healthcare professionals from Avera, Sanford Health, Good Samaritan, Sioux Falls Specialty Hospital, and the panel was facilitated by Representative Mark Mickelson, who we were very grateful that he took time away from the legislature to come and to visit with us. And it was just a great conversation. A lot of good ideas were shared, and I wanted to bring it to the board's attention because through that type of effort, I hope that Southeast will continue to reach out and work with and partner. I think what's really exciting, the opportunity to partner with some of these industries as we go forward. A special recognition to Shelley Nemec, who's the foundation director, who worked very hard to pull together the panel and work in all of the meeting logistics. But it was a really well-attended event in which we were very proud in terms of the amount of representation we had across, again, the region, not only from Sioux Falls, but across the region, and especially encouraging in the sense that they are looking to Southeast to take a leadership role to help meet this skilled workforce shortage. So we're able to come forward with a number of different ideas there that were mentioned about some work in relation to business courses for some of our healthcare graduates, and maybe looking at a healthcare certificate in business to help out there. Diversity was another issue that was brought forward, and what can we do in relation to, and the Sioux Falls School District was talked about in that, a rising number of minority students, about 36%, I believe now, and a number of those students not continuing on to post-secondary. So what can Southeast do to address that situation? So I think we were challenged a bit, and I think there were a lot of good opportunities that were presented there. And we hope to try to have about one of these sector breakfasts now each month for the rest of the spring semester. So thank you.
Thanks. Can I get a motion to acknowledge the report on the healthcare sector breakfast, please?
So move.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. The next report.
Test my technology skills here, we might be in trouble. We'll go to the old school method. Maybe. Vice President Parker and members of the board, I have 3 separate reports for you today. The first one is dealing with an MOU with our SFEA Part 2 agreement. This is a proposal before you that we're asking for approval, and it's modifying our existing agreement with them, extending the deadline to submit notice for early retirement. We've, on several occasions, tried to schedule SDRS to come out to campus to talk to faculty and staff, and we've had a couple weather-related delays. So if you want to know when the next weather event is, our meeting's scheduled for February 16th, so we can plan around that. But this just formalizes what we're trying to do in terms of extending that deadline from February 1st for notification without penalty to March 1st of 2017. This is just affecting this year. There's also a modification on the trailing end of it. An individual could still submit a request for early retirement up through August 1st. This moves this up to June 30th or July 1st. So this was drafted in conjunction with SFEA, has been reviewed and looked at by legal counsel. So we're requesting approval of the modification to the agreement through the MOU.
Thank you.
Questions?
Move to accept the MOU as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Thanks, Rich.
The second report I have is the second quarter financial reports. This runs from July 2016 through December 31st of 2016, so it's a look at the first 6 months. First document that we always present is our cash balances. So as you go down and you take a look at those, it lays out the cash by the different funds that we have. So we have 4 active funds right now, the post-secondary fund, which is all of the teaching and 4 credit programs, the bookstore fund, which handles all the, obviously, sales of the books and the laptop sales to students, the post-secondary food service fund, which is just getting underway. The food service opened right at the end of October, the first part of November. So we're starting to see a little bit of activity there. If you look at that large negative balance, if you recall, we have a planned loan from the bookstore fund to provide the seed money for that. That'll be repaid over a period of years. It's a non-interest bearing loan. So the supervisor of the food service fund was able to negotiate fairly good terms with the food supervisor of the bookstore fund. And then the next one is the post-secondary child care fund, and then finally the TSI fund, which we have closed out, but that activity won't actually take place until this year, so we'll close that out. One thing to note on the cash balances, December tends to be a low point for us, December and August. That's right at the end of each of our trailing semesters and through the summer term. There was a deposit in transit as of the year end, so that didn't get receipted in or deposited as of December. So the cash balance that would have come down, we had some coordination issues with signatures. So there's the cash for December would typically look a little bit better than this. So that'll be reflected in the next month's report. As we dive into the individual funds, I'm going to spend a lot of time on the post-secondary one because this really rolls up into the task document. See if I can get that to come in a little bit for you. But one of the things that I tend to look at is the year-to-year comparison, and in particular, the percentages that you would look to see. So we're tracking online with all of these categories. When you look at our overall revenues, 49% so far this year. Last year's a little bit skewed because of the facility fees or the bond fees coming in for the construction project. But when you look at our main revenue source in terms of that tuition and fees, that's on track with where we were setting last year. We've talked about our enrollment being down a little bit. I'll get into that when we get into the tasks, the actual percentages of how we're looking and how we think we're going to wind up into the end of the years. When you get into the other categories, as we scroll down and we look at the various things, everything is tracking as we would anticipate it to track throughout the course of the first half of the year. The one notable exception is when you get down into building improvements, you'll notice there's a 137% of the budget that was expended. There's a supplemental that'll be coming forward on that. What had happened is we shifted the project timeline for the renovation of the Ed Wood, extended that out. The initial completion would have been the early part of this fiscal year. We've made some modifications and we'll extend that construction period into this next year. So it wasn't planned, wasn't budgeted for that way. So we'll supplement in with that. There's bond funds related to it, so that'll be the primary source of it. The funds of our own that we were planning to use was already programmed in there. So that adjustment will be coming forward in a future action. So as we look at it, like I said, we're tracking where we thought we would track. When I get into the task report, as we look at that, there's elements in this that become at this point more predictable. When we're looking at our revenues in terms of tuition fees, we have our spring enrollments now. We know where we're going to wind up. What's left in the summer term is a relatively small piece of it. When you get into the salaries and the benefits, that's pretty easy to track and measure going forward. We know what our staff placement is. The spring adjunct has been loaded and taken into consideration. It's really that small piece of the summer one. The variability really comes into some of those other categories. When we start getting down into those purchase services and some of those supplies, there can be a little bit of movement. But as I said, when I get into that task, I think when we talk about the analysis that was done, I think we feel pretty comfortable with where we're going to wind up. Any questions related to the post-secondary fund? Bookstore fund's a little easier to look at, not quite as many categories. Up a little bit in terms of our sales of goods and services. Laptops are tracking about the same as what they did last year as far as our term sales to students. The dollar value of the books are up, and I know there was publisher was a big uptick in pricing on that, and if you've looked at the price of books, it is unbelievable. So that revenue upturn really has to do more with the pricing of it, not necessarily the number of units that are being sold. We're also trying to implement and expand options that help students in terms of savings, looking at e-books, looking at book rentals, which reduces the cost for students. So trying to do what we can, but we're really at the mercy of the publishers and where they're going with it. So you see that uptick in the supplies and materials that's related to those inventory purchases. So you see that moving with those sales components. But again, we're tracking where we would expect to track. So. Food service fund, we got started later because of the building delays and getting that project completed. So it didn't open until November. Another thing to mention on this December report, this is only showing sales through November. Revenue always trails a month just because of our relationship and reporting funds down to the district and getting them on the ledger. The expenditures are already on your ledger, not ours. So the expenditures always reflect 6 months of activity. The revenue always trails 1 month. You know, we're starting to see, it's an interesting anecdote. We handed out financial aid checks yesterday, and our volume has gone up. So money in the pocket is an important thing for sales. So we're going to continue to look at this. Feel pretty confident that it's gaining acceptance. It's gaining an understanding of what's available to students. I think when we bring in the next set of students next fall that are introduced to it initially and have been through their orientations, we're going to start to see those sales climb. The unfortunate thing is we open November and then we dive right into December, which is a bad month because we're only in class for a couple weeks. Feel pretty good about the staff that we have. They're a couple of experienced food service individuals, understand about controlling costs, cost of goods sold, and right-sizing the staff for the demands for the services. So while initially it looks a little bit painful when you look at that bottom line, that's really gearing up and getting set up for opening the operations, the training costs, getting it into place, training staff, and testing products. So we'll start to see that move as we go through the rest of the fiscal year here.
Rich, have you tried to leverage at all the kids in the apartments over there and trying to devise some sort of way to leverage them and their and there's nothing out there, right?
Right, and, one of the things that we were really interested in, and we're exploring all of these opportunities, we were not only the students in housing, but also looking at the areas, businesses around there. Orion Foods, as Kurt and Brian spoke of, is our partner in this, and they're involved and actively engaged in that as well. We've intentionally held off doing that a little bit in the sense we were wanting to measure what would happen with that financial aid distribution. And so we were trying to create a little bit of a control group to see what happens. And where we think this is going as a bigger element for us is related to a one-card system where mom and dad can load money onto a card that a student can use that has applications in housing. So that's how we're going to look to tie that, not only the housing student, but our students overall. Right now, the hours of operation don't lend itself to the students at night. We're running basically from 7 until 3 during the day, focusing on that market right now, the breakfast and lunch market as we go to get developed. But yeah, clearly there's a
Well, maybe you
captive.
can do a survey to them, see
Yeah.
how many would be interested in a meal plan and see
Yeah.
if you could financially make it work. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's another element to it is, do we get a dedicated meal plan? Do we do similar to what Dakota Golf does, where you load a card or you buy the pass and you get a 10% up for it? So we're exploring all of those things and looking at what we need to do. But this first couple days, just since we've handed out those aid checks, has really kind of been a benchmark, or has really told us something in terms of that flexibility and that availability of cash. I'm thinking about my own daughters and knowing that if I load it and they can only use it for food, at least I know they're going to be able to eat, and they're not, down at the mall with their debit card that I give them. So we're exploring all those things, all of those options, not only in who we sell to, but also what we sell. So we'll continue to report out on that as we move forward. Child Care Fund is, as we're moving through the year here, I think I'm just going to go right down to the bottom line on this. You're seeing a $20,000 revenue over expenditures. Again, you got to remember the revenue's lagging a month, so if you throw in the December revenue, that deficit's about $9,000, so it's manageable. It's something that Tracy and his group continues to look at in terms of the delivery of their services and the service providers. So we're continuing to monitor the performance of the Child Care Fund. And I won't put the TSI fund up, there's nothing on there, it's just a matter of when we get to close it out. And then the last report is the cash flow statement. Summarizes revenues, just very high level, changes in our assets and liabilities that impact the use of cash. You see that diving down a little bit, like I said, because of that deposit in transit. This is, the first half is looking from just the month of November to December, through December, I should say, and then the last is the bottom part of it. It goes from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So nothing unusual in there either. The cash is moving as we would expect it to move. We're not seeing a big uptick in our receivables. That's always a thing that we're concerned about. Students paying their bills, and actually our bad debt is looking pretty good at this point. So all in all, what I would expect in a report at this point. So questions overall about the various fund reports?
Any questions for Rich? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the report on Southeast Text FY 17 second quarter financials?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The last report relates to the operating task, and just a quick reminder what that refers to. We built the FY 17 budget with a structural deficit, $638,000, with a plan to find those funds along the way. Previous reports that I've done to you is we've really identified things we know about, the actual known savings that we were having, the known things that were happening in terms of our credits. This broadens that viewpoint and really takes a look at where do you think we're going to wind up at the end of the year. The midpoint is a good time, like I said, with the revenues. We kind of know when the spring's coming in. We know where we're going to be at in that, and it gets a lot more objective in those measurements on this task. So when we go down and we look at the variances, and I split it out and got into some very broad categories from a revenue standpoint, and then also from an expenditure standpoint, you're looking at the tuition and fees, which move together for the most part. They're a per credit basis. That's really reflecting a little bit of a downturn in the credits, about 4%, less than what we budgeted, but not insurmountable, not a end of the world type of situation as it relates to those credits. Local sources, that's our sales of goods and services. Different programs do some internal things, auto, collision, does some outside work. It's our miscellaneous revenue categories. Seeing a favorable variance as we project that out. State aid, we know what we're going to get in terms of our state aid. The only variable component to that is our tuition buy down. And at this point, we're really just left with our summer credit. So that's a very real and measurable number. The other state revenue, the variance there, why it looks so big is, again, goes back to those bond funds with the health and education bonding and just the way that project got delayed and the drawdown on those funds. Federal revenue, that's the differential. That's typically a zero-sum game. There's a little bit of indirect that we're going to realize that wasn't budgeted, but there's also some support of the federal programs that we're required to do as a match in terms of work study and ABE and some of those other dollars. So, and then the final piece is the IT infrastructure. This is an FY16 carryover. That'll come forward as a supplement to the infrastructure IT for the new building was really planned and budgeted for in FY16. If the building would have been tracked, it would have been expended in that. It actually wound up being expended in FY17. So that goes into our expenditure category, so we should supplement and carry over that budget into this year, so we'll do that. So as we look at those variances, I think the thing that's important to recognize is that the revenue components are very, very measurable and very objective. I don't expect to see a lot of variance as we get through the end of the year on our revenue components. And I don't see a lot of adjustment in that favorable variance. We're going to be very close to that. When you get down onto the expenditure sides of it, same type of thing as I mentioned earlier. When we start looking at our salaries and benefits, that becomes very measurable. We know where we're going to be at. There's some part-time wages, but that's such a small piece of it, it's not going to sway that one way or the other. The majority of those savings as we look at salaries has to do with natural attrition that's taken place. If somebody's left, we've made a conscious decision not to fill that position, and the folks that remain absorb that work and that effort. There's some related to the delay in opening the building. For example, in the custodial group, there's about a $45,000 variance in that. Well, that has to do with that building being delayed. We had 2 custodians on there beginning July 1, but they came on later in the year, so we recognized a savings in that. We've had some natural turnover in that position that we're seeing that as well. When you look at the benefits, you start to go, well, that's 53% of your wages, and that our benefits cost obviously isn't that high, but it really comes down to some variances in the way that we calculate the benefits. 2 components to it. Obviously, there's a trailing component to those full-time salaries, but the second piece of it is that when I calculate the budget for the FICA, Social Security, Medicare taxes, I'm doing it on the gross salaries, but it's actually applied to the pre-tax types of things. And so there's usually always a little bit of a variance associated with that. The second element of it is related to adjunct. If adjunct is being taught by an on-staff member, they're entitled to get the 6% SDRS match. An adjunct that's not a full-time employee is not. Well, when we develop that adjunct budget, I don't know who is and who isn't, so we budget for the 6% on the entire thing. So that pushes that benefit percentage up a little bit higher than what you would typically see it as a normal salary dollar. Purchase services, when we started getting into that, there's some savings that we realized there because of a security contracted position that we had that we did not fill. We had an evening security guard leave. We did some adjusting with our daytime schedule with the housing security to try to narrow that gap, but also recognize and realize that savings. There's some savings associated with the hospital contract employees that we have. And then there's some things in the TAC grant that are budgeted but may not be expended on there. But remember that tax a federal revenue component. So if I save on the expenditure side of it, there's an unfavorable on the revenue because I'm not getting the revenue for that. Supplies and materials, relatively minor as we manage this, manage through it. Capital equipment, just some minor things there, and that really could be on some of it on the supply side. There's what we have, 4710, 4790 are non-capitalized items. Sometimes when we put budget in there, it winds up being expended because it really fits the capital definition. So just some adjustments there. The capital, the 1.2, that's really related to the building project. While you're seeing that unfavorable there, that wasn't budgeted. And then finally, the dues and fees. And again, there's a TAC federal component to that element. So when you look at the expenditure variances, when I look at objective measurements, which ones are we not going to see a lot of movement by the end of the year? I think we're looking at salaries and benefits being very measurable. The capital stuff is being very measurable as well, knowing where we're going to end up. There might be a little bit of variance on that equipment, but on the building side of it, that's going to be very solid in terms of that projection. So we might see some movement in the purchase services, supplies, and materials. But overall, when we look at this projection, it kind of did a couple things, and I probably should have laid this out firsthand. This wasn't me taking major categories and going, well, divide by 6, take times 2, and take times 12 and get a number. I actually went through every single account, about 2,500 of them, looked at every single one. There's some judgment in there, but there's also some knowledge that goes with that of, you know, this is what we typically tend to see. This is how it trends. So I don't want to say I would bet on that number at the end of it, but I think we're pretty close to where we're going to be. And the point, too, that I'm trying to make is as we look at that favorable variance on the revenue, look at the little bit of an unfavorable, which it really isn't on the expenditure side. It's more that building project. We're very close to achieving that task and finding those dollars along the way. Obviously, we still have 5 months to go. This is projecting out where we think we're going to end. So the efforts that all of the campus community has made has yielded this, and if they continue on that path, we should make that task and be able to cover that structural deficit at the end of our budget. It's also important at this time of the year because it lays a foundation as we're working on developing our FY18 budget. It is, do you carry these savings over into that budget? How do you look at it going into that? But the bright spot of it is we're able to cover that, and we're not trying to make up a hole at the end of FY17 that we've got to carry into FY18. So feel very good about the efforts that have been done and the accomplishments of everybody involved out there. And I actually kind of look forward to the year-end summary in August, and I'll try to remember to bring this page with me so we can lay the two together, but that's where we're at with it. So, any questions or?
No, just appreciate the diligence and detail that you go through. Like it said, you don't just take it times 2 and swag a number. You actually zero basis. And you know, what I was impressed by when I added up on the expense side, everything outside the capital items, it was about $950,000 in expense savings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is tremendous because, as you said, it'll set you up going into next year and step
Right.
towards eliminating that structural deficit ongoing
Right.
Without having to make significant changes. So that's what I'm encouraged by. But thank you for all your work. I know.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. And I think it really allows us to, as revenue comes in, that has a greater impact. As I said, we're not trying to fill that hole. That revenue, as those credits come in, has this impact of now we have this additional revenue stream starting to build again and starting to gain some of that momentum the things that have been done. And I don't mean to reiterate everything, but what President Griggs has done in getting out into the community and generating some excitement. I think we've talked about it before as being that secret on the hill. Hopefully that's starting to dissipate, and we're going to start seeing that showing up in our revenue numbers as well. So.
Thanks, Rich.
And I know you'll find a $9,300, Rich.
Yes, or I won't come back.
No pressure.
No. No.
Can I get a motion to acknowledge the FY17 operating efficiency task update?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Good work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, and can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.